Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Day 3 of the Navy League's Small Business Opportunities webinar series. I'm Luke Lorenz, Senior Manager for Legislative Affairs at Navy League Headquarters. Today's discussion will focus on procurement. I'd like to introduce to you Navy League National Executive Director Mike Stevens, retired 13th Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, who will introduce today's speakers. Sir, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you to everyone for joining Navy League Learns for Day 3 of our Small Business Opportunities webinar series. Thank you again to our sponsor, IBM, for making this week possible. Our speakers today are Cindy Shaver, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Procurement, Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. She is the Senior Procurement Executive for Acquisition and Contracting Policy that governs the operations of the Department of the Navy's worldwide acquisition system, with an annual obligation well in excess of $100 billion. She is joined today by Mr. Thomas Frankfurt, Assistant General Counsel of the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. Mr. Frankfurt serves as the Principal Legal Advisor to the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, the senior Department of the Navy official who is in charge of setting policy and managing all aspects of the development and acquisition of Navy and Marine Corps platforms and weapon systems. Secretary Shaver, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks so much for that introduction, and thanks to the Navy League for having us both here today. I was really looking forward to Sea Air Space. It was going to be my first engagement at Sea Air Space as the new head of DAS and procurement. So I appreciate this venue and wish we could all be together face to face, but most importantly, that everybody is staying well with their families, their employees, and their coworkers during this time. I've got a few opening remarks, but then I really want to turn it over to the audience so we can have some dialogue and hopefully some healthy questions and answers. But I want to give you a little bit of a framework with regards to the Navy and small business, which is an area I'm really passionate about, of how we can best leverage the small business community in excelling the Navy's mission. Just to give you a frame of reference, in FY19, we did about $124 billion worth of business, over 240,000 contracting actions across our 10 contracting activities across the Department of Navy. So that was about a 10% increase from FY18 and in dollars, but a 10% decrease in actions as we're trying to get more efficient and more effective. And with regards to small business, we put $16 billion in the hands of small business prime contractors, plus exponentially more than that from a subcontracting opportunity for our small businesses. We were very successful in meeting all of our small business goals in all categories, but the discussion today really I don't really want to focus on goals and metrics. While they're important, I think the bigger conversation to have today is what small business brings in really accelerating the Navy's mission, both in terms of innovation, creative disruption, and technology insertion, and the effectiveness and agility that small business brings to the table. So while we're doing well on the goals perspective, from a metrics perspective, I really want to talk about that innovation and how we bring more small businesses into the fold to get the Navy's mission in the best place possible, especially during this great power competition that we're in. Just transitioning a little bit to give some perspective also to the way we're organized. We have a very distributed command and control model for contract execution across the Department of Navy. We have 10 separate contracting activities that are really aligned based upon their product and their market share area. And so sometimes that can be confusing for small businesses of who do I talk to, where's my entry into market for Department of Navy. So hopefully, I know you talked with Mr. Smith yesterday. Hopefully you've checked out the Office of Small Businesses website that does have links to all of the head of the contracting activities, the deputies of small businesses, and the heads of contracts within those organizations, as well as the long range acquisition forecast links, where we're really pushing to try to get some understanding and definition to what is the demand signal for contracting and procurements in the future. So you can see those technology areas that we're pursuing and hopefully find your way into the Department of Navy marketplace. I think the other thing that I wanted to also add was to note that, during this time of COVID crisis, the Navy is open for business. You heard from Secretary Gertz earlier this week, and we are really working and pushing to accelerate our contract execution to try to make sure that we're giving stability to the industrial base and also building that backlog of work. Our obligations are up about 1/3 more than they were at this same time next year, and we're also trending very well in that funds going to small businesses at the prime level. So I hope again for a good, healthy dialogue with you today of how we can really leverage the small business community in putting forth the Navy's mission in the best way possible. With that, Tom, if you have some stuff
All right,
to add.
thank you, Cindy. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to everyone out there listening or watching. If you'll indulge me, I have a personal note before I get started on the small business topics. And this is for those folks who've been teleworking and really haven't gone beyond their neighborhood for exercise or the grocery store and have been mostly working within the home. This is my first venture out in a month. And as I was traveling to the Pentagon and thinking about what was I was going to be faced with, it was a little daunting. And then when you get into the Pentagon, you have to wear a mask now, like most places. So it becomes a little surreal, where the common areas, everyone's in their mask. But after a while, I got more comfortable. Folks are respecting social distancing and definitely complying with the mask policy. I guess what I'm saying is that as we come back to work or come back in the building, everyone's going to have a little different feeling about it. We're going to have to accommodate folks on a much more gradual basis. And for those folks who have been coming to work every day and hitting the front lines from day one, I salute you for your courage and a job well done. Okay, I have a few topics. I'm going to start with data rights. This is a big topic, especially with small business innovative research contracts or SBIR contracts. And there's a feeling out there that I've heard from organizations and from individual SBIR contractors that the government is not doing as good a job as we should be doing in protecting the SBIR data rights. And unlike non-SBIR data rights, the government pays for the development of these rights, but the contractor gets to keep the data rights on a limited for technical data purposes and restricted for software purposes. So even though we're paying, the SBIR contractors have proprietary and limited rights interests or restricted rights interests in that data. And what I would ask is that the SBIR contractors put markings on their data. Any data that they deem protected, please put the markings. We'd like to see the conforming markings in the DFARS for SBIR data rights. But even if you don't do that, put markings on there so at least that the government's on notice or the prime contractor's on notice that that data needs to be protected. And prime contractors generally, I guess there are exceptions, will just pass on those data rights to the contracting officer. And if the contracting officer believes that they're non-conforming, then they'll go back and make sure that the rights conform. So that's the first thing. Please mark your data. Here's the next thing. If with the discussions with the prime or discussions with government technical folks, there comes a discussion that, hey, you don't really need to put these markings on there. It's better for the contract, or it's better for development if we can share this with others so that the development will exponentially increase or will be better for national defense overall. And you don't feel good about that because you want that data protected. Please raise that with the prime if that's the case. And if you don't get satisfaction from the prime, I would recommend, and this is Tom Frankfurt, this is your legal advice. you all have to get your own lawyers, but just from a good business relationship between the government and cyber contractors, I would recommend that you get in touch with the contracting officer, and the contracting officer will take the necessary steps that need to be taken to ensure that all rights are appropriately protected. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenge process. But the point of all that is the government wants to protect your data. We don't want to get in a situation where maybe our technical people don't understand the ramifications of that, or you're concerned, or you haven't properly marked it, or you've marked it in a way that you think doesn't protect your rights. We want all that cleared up so that all your rights are protected and we can move along with the cyber program. So if it turns out that you bring it to the contracting officer's attention and the contracting officer agrees with you, they'll work with you to make sure that your rights are stated properly and conform. The contracting officer, after looking at it, says, you know, really that's data that was brought into the cyber relationship from outside, and that's really something the government has unlimited or government purpose rights in. And there's a dispute, the contracting officer will ask you to show through writings that, in fact, that was data or software that was worked during your cyber effort and it is your own. And if at the end of that, the contracting officer decides that she doesn't agree with you, then we the government will go ahead and use the data. But when we give you that notice that we're going to use the data, you have 90 days to go to the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals, or a year to go to the Court of Federal Claims to dispute that and protect your data. And usually it'll be, if you go to the Court of Federal Claims, it could be an injunction or it could be on the merits of the substance of the dispute, which eventually the judge will get to. If it turns out that the government overrides, and they have that authority to do, overrides the lawsuit or decides to go ahead and use the data, and we end up losing ultimately, you'll be entitled to damages. And judges are very creative at establishing damages, either lost profit or another measure. If it's something else, and this happens, if it's something else and you find that the government has improperly, or you believe improperly, released the data to a competitor, for example, then you have the right to go to the board and dispute that. You can argue breach of contract under the cyber clause where we're supposed to protect it. And if you believe there's duress or coercion, you have that right too. But in those situations, I go back to the best route and the most workable route, and to approach the problem early on, is to get with the contracting officer. And they'll have lots of assets at their disposal to help come to the right conclusion. And then just one more note on data rights. I think everyone's seen that the SBA has changed the rule that it's now limited to 20 years from cyber phase 1 to cyber phase 3. It used to be unlimited in the time period, but now it's 20 years overall. All right, that ends my data rights discussion. All right, then the next topic I wanted to talk about is the Runway Act. I guess most folks are aware of this, but I'll just refresh everyone's recollection because it came out, final rule came out in January of this year, January 6, 2020, and it changed the average for of your receipts for revenue-based determination from 3 years to 5 years. Some folks had concerns about the 5 years because there could be a situation where the later years folks might have declining revenue, and if they have to graduate based on earlier revenue, then they're going to be locked out longer from getting back into the small business program. So the SBA recognized this to a certain extent, so they allowed you either to take the 3-year period, the earlier 3-year period, or the 5-year period through January of 2022. And there's a couple of COVID-19 issues I'd like to bring to your attention that the SBA has put out. One is the hub zone. The SBA has come out and said that if your workforce has to telework and they're outside the hub zone area, you won't lose your hub zone eligibility or hub zone status as long as the COVID-19 pandemic is ongoing. And they haven't put an end date on that. So at some point, I guess they'll come up with an end date. But that's for your hub zone folks, and your workforce outside the area of the hub zone telecommuting, you get to maintain your hub zone status. For another accommodation they made is for 8A contractors. If during the period of March 13 through 20 and March 12 through 2021, if because of the COVID-19, you're unable to bid on 8A contracts for whatever reason, you get to add a year, up to a year, to your eligibility for the 8A program. So it essentially takes it from a 9-year period to a 10-year period. And that's that. So there is a time period for that. There's a 1-year time period. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to get to for the questions. The something that came out also as a DFARS deviation recently for 8As is that J&As are no longer required for $100 million or less. That's more for the government folks, but small business folks, you should recognize that too. It used to be 22 million. That was the FAR provision, but now for DoD, and it's 100 million, and that's implementing an NDA provision in FY20, I think, Section 823. Over 100 million, it'll be the head of the contracting activity.
For cyber procurement.
Yes, for cyber procurements. Thanks, Cindy. And then I think Bob Smith mentioned this yesterday, but I just want to foot stomp it because the Secretary Gertz is in great affection for the small business world and for getting innovation and to the sailors and Marines and other war fighters as soon as possible. They've come up with this, I'll call it Shark Tank-like process where we use the cyber community, we'll award a certain number of cyber contracts, some seed money, and the contractors get to pitch their innovation or their project to the contract folks and the program manager folks, and we'll see how it's going to be applied across the Navy. And then after that, then the next day, we look to team up private equity firms with the cyber folks to see if there's interest from the private equity firms and the cyber projects, those particular cyber projects. That's something that Bob Smith is leading and NavalX is leading, and it's a great tool. It's a great tool. And one final thing on opportunities. DOD is being asked to help out HHS for PPE and other COVID-19 related procurements. And we've done that. We've been doing that on a smaller scale with the warfare centers for things like hand sanitizer, for example. But this will obviously be a bigger effort if and when it comes to the Navy. It's just been approached. And then finally, just a note on consolidation and bundling. We take here at the Navy, we take consolidation and bundling very serious in terms of protecting small business. And I'd be interested in from the folks out in on the net how they feel about consolidation and bundling these days. Do they feel like they're losing opportunities as a result of it? And that's basically it. And so with that, I'll close. Right.
Question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Frankfurt and Ms. Shaver, for providing us with your expertise this afternoon. We will now move into our question and answer portion, and here's our first question. How can a small business be added to a non-competitive open market acquisitions list with or without exceeding the simplified acquisitions threshold?
So make sure that I understand the question. Certainly, if I want you to take a look at the long range acquisition forecast, so you know exactly what is coming out and where the needs are. I would say directly contacting those contracting officers and those program managers would be the first step to making sure that they know you're in the market space and know that you have a product that will meet the requirement. And then I guess it's a matter of if there's any qualification requirements for that specific item. Obviously, you know, as the competition advocate, we're looking to increase competition and increase the marketplace. So, you know, we're always looking for, you know, what's out there in the market that will be able to satisfy the requirements and make sure if there's any qualifications that need to be done, that we can get qualification done and add you to that list, or to know that there's qualifications that need to be done for specific product lines. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question asks, in order to provide the best value to the Navy and for consistency with commercial practices, many small business concerns choose to not incur the substantial administrative burden and costs associated with cost plus fixed value, fixed fee contracts. But this company provides professional engineering services on a fixed price, level of effort, or time and materials basis instead. Since the Seaport Next Gen contract prohibits these pricing arrangements for prime task orders, this company cannot compete for prime task order awards. Would the Navy consider allowing FP Low or T&M prime task orders on Seaport Next Gen, especially for small business set-asides, to increase opportunities for small businesses and better promote competition?
So that's a really good question. I will tell you that Seaport Next Gen does allow for firm fixed price. So if you are not, if you don't have an approved accounting system and can't bid on a cost reimbursement basis, you can absolutely bid for firm fixed price. And I would suggest, as you see announcements coming out for work, that you make sure that you reach out to the contracting officer to determine if that requirement can be fixed price. You know, sometimes in Seaport, the challenge is making sure that we actually get enough definition to the requirement so that we can release it on a firm fixed price basis. So that dialogue and knowing that that vendor is out there is important. I will tell you, we don't do much time and materials in the Department of Navy. It is one of the least preferred methods of contracting. The areas where we tend to do more time and materials, if it's required, usually are through GSA schedules. And fixed price schedule buys, but there is the avenue to bid from fixed price in Seaport, and I would recommend that that vendor have direct dialogue with those contracting officers on those procurements that they come out so that they know that they're in the marketplace. And then, of course, there is also the ability to subcontract as well.
Thank you for that, ma'am. Our next question asks, what is the current Department of Navy policy regarding direct to phase 2 Small Business Innovation Research Awards?
So we have, I don't know if we actually have a policy. That's a good question. There's nothing that precludes us from doing it if we believe that there's enough definition to the product that we can go directly to a phase 2.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question asks, what is the best source for receiving updated information on Navy procurement processes and Navy procurement priorities?
So I would again point you to that long-range acquisition forecast, and the Office of Small Business Programs has all those links on the website. We are pushing our heads of our contracting activities very hard to make sure that they're trying to keep those lists updated so that you can see what is coming out from a solicitation perspective over the next couple of years. So that would be the #1 place that I would point you to. And then also from a regulation and policy perspective, the Navy Marine Corps acquisition regulations, or the NMCARs, are posted so that you can see those regulations and how they change over time.
Regarding the DoD COVID-19 stimulus package, are Navy program offices able to request specific funding to support OEMs and small businesses in order to maintain existing supply chains? And if so, what is the process?
So, do you want to take this one?
Well, I'm not aware of that answer to that specific question, but as Secretary Gertz has put out repeatedly, the Navy has done a great job of helping with cash flow. And we've done that through increased progress payments for smalls up to 95%, and quickly resolving any kind of REA type issues. And if there are withholds with the primes, that money can flow down to the smalls.
Yeah, so also in increasing the progress payments across all of the industrial base and working with OSD and DCMA. And the hope is also that we're seeing that the large businesses are also flowing that cash flow increase to all of its small business industrial base, because the main focus of that was a cash flow effort to make sure that we keep the industrial base healthy as possible.
Thank you for that. Our next question asks, is there a separate small business office that handles Navy medicine and TRICARE regarding health IT initiatives?
So we have the Navy Medical Logistics Organization that does do procurement as it relates to Navy Medical. And you can get through them. I think they're a branch office of the Naval Supply Systems Command. So we'll make sure we get that information out to everybody.
Thank you so much. We also have an attendee who mentions that their company produces a pain management device, and they're excited to introduce this device to naval bases and hospitals. But they ask, as a supplier, who should we contact at these facilities to gauge interest and initiate product demonstrations or trials? Should they reach out to physicians, procurement personnel, or others? And how do decision makers prefer to be approached during this period of stay-at-home rules? Is it best to use phone calls, emails, or other methods?
So I would say right now, phone calls and emails are kind of the restriction, but I will tell you, if you would like to email that information to me, cindy.shaver@navy.mil, I'll make sure that it gets into the right contracting officer's hands, but more importantly, to reach out to the requirements holders. You know, I've reminded folks in many venues that as contracting officers, we don't actually have money or requirements. It's the fleet and the Navy that has the requirements, and we are the mechanism to make sure that we take those requirements, work with industry, and get it under contract so that we can get mission executed. So I can start you with the contracting officers and the cognizant small business rep, but we'll make sure we want to get you in touch with those program managers that have those requirements and could benefit from that need. Thanks.
And again, Secretary Gertz early on issued a memo to our folks that we should be looking to support COVID-19 relief through our R&D facilities, and we've done that. An example I can think of, and I mentioned earlier, was folks have come in and said they have the ability to manufacture hand sanitizer, which is different than their original business, and we've directed those folks to a particular warfare center that has looked at that already.
Thank you, sir. The fiscal year 2018 NDAA called for not later than 100 days after the date of enactment, the Secretary of Defense shall establish a pilot program under which the department shall award multiple award contracts to covered small business concerns for the purchase of technologies, supplies, or services that the covered small business concern has developed through the SBIR or STTR program. Is the Navy going to create a multiple award contract for SBIR Phase 3?
So I'm not aware of any multiple award contract actions for SBIR Phase 3. I will tell you that we are, though, definitely looking at how we can increase the Phase 1s and Phase 2s so that we make sure that we're able to get that technology in the hands of program managers that actually fund Phase 3s and beyond. But it's something that we will take under advisement and see what the opportunities are there.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to read our next question verbatim for the benefit of our attendee who submitted it. We are licensing technology readiness level 7 technology from a DoD agency and enhancing it to fulfill a need for various DoD stakeholders, including the Navy. How can we engage your office to identify the appropriate Navy stakeholders and get initial funding for a proof of concept via potentially an other transaction authority, unlike SBIR, which is meant for research?
So let me talk a little bit about other transaction authority within the Department of Navy. We have utilized mostly the warfare centers to execute other transaction authority across the Department of Navy. And we're utilizing both direct OTAs for specific technologies as well as some consortium OTAs. So we're making sure that we map that technology out. So again, if you would like to contact my office, we can point you in the right direction to the Cognizant Warfare Center or head of the contracting activity that's working in that particular product line. Again, we are organized very much along product line for execution. So understanding kind of what the technology is will help us align it to the right procurement and requirements organization.
Thank you, ma'am. I believe you both touched on this in your opening remarks, but there might still be a little bit of confusion. So I'll ask, is the government able to conduct contract evaluations with the telework policy?
So yes, we have been. I will tell you that we're using all the tools available and trying to increase our business tools so that we're making sure that we are continuing to do source selections, continuing to make awards, but also making sure that we're protecting source selection data appropriately. But we have continued to accelerate awards, and we are definitely open for business during this period of COVID.
Yeah, I'll just second that. If you look in the press over the last week or so, we awarded a very large procurement recently that was an intense source selection, and the data was fully protected and the information was fully protected for all lawful wars. So yes, concur that we're, in some respects, we might be doing a more efficient job in going through the source selection.
Yeah, I think we've expanded our ability to take proposals electronically, where we might have gone old school and gotten proposals in hard copies. So I think we're pushing the envelope there and seeing how we can hopefully capitalize on those opportunities when we come out of COVID and end up better than we were before with regards to flexibility. and making sure that we're staying agile to conduct those source selections during this time frame. We want to keep all of our procurements on schedule, and idealistically, we like to accelerate as much as possible.
Thank you for that. I'm sure that's very welcome news to everyone listening. Another attendee asks, if we have a firm fixed price contract for services and our contractor was called up to the reserves, are we still able to bill, or do we extend the contract until their return?
So the billing is basically based on performance. So if you were able to perform, you should be able to bill.
Thank you. Our next attendee asks, we are disadvantaged business enterprise certified. Does the Navy utilize this certification?
Disadvantaged
Is that,
business
is that an 8A? Yes, if it's 8A, obviously we recognice that. And we have a robust 8A acquisition program.
Thank you, sir. Our next question asks, what steps are you taking to simplify the government procurement process for small businesses?
So let me answer that in general terms from a larger perspective. We have been working quite extensively over the last several years to figure out how we can streamline our acquisition processes smartly. Definitely trying to strip off drag where we feel that the risk isn't warranted, and also recognizing that not all procurements are created equal. The risk equation isn't the same for all procurements, and therefore, we need to make sure that our procurement actions match the risk in a particular procurement. So we've been working to streamline the Navy acquisition regulations, the NMCARs. And we've done so extensively, as well as I've put out challenges to all of the contracting and acquisition workforce. If they see rules or regulations or signatory authorities and approval authorities that they feel might be antiquated or not necessary, or there's a better way to do it, we're challenging them to send in their ideas so that we can make some changes. I think we've had some successes in trying to strip off drag. And sometimes you might say, well, it's one piece of paper. What does one piece of paper matter? However, when you're looking across an enterprise as large as the Department of Navy, $100+ billion a year, 240,000 actions, every piece of paper counts, every dollar counts, every day counts. And so, sometimes it's not big wins, but little wins that add up. And I think that is part of the reason that we are seeing the acceleration in dollars while we're processing less procurement actions, because we are working to get more efficient and effective.
And just to follow up on that, definitely since Secretary Gertz has been here, we've been delegating much of this work as far down as we can. So for example, acquisition vehicles such as procurement for test and experimental purposes and prize challenges, that approval for those were at the secretariat level. We've pushed those all the way down to the contracting officer or chief of the contracting office, so that you won't have, like Cindy said, that bureaucratic drag up at the top. And that's been working very well, I believe.
Yeah, empowering at the deck plate is very, very important to streamlining.
Well, thank you both for your efforts to make the process as simple and straightforward as possible for our attendees. From a procurement perspective, what are some best practices or some advice you would offer on how to stand out on solicitation responses?
So I would start even before the solicitation response, and that is please do engage the program offices, engage the requirement holders, go to their industry days, go to their speaking events, making sure that you really understand their product, where they're challenged in delivering their product or service, and understanding what you can bring to the table. If you are new to the business, getting involved with our large business primes and starting as a subcontractor is a great way to get into a program and really understand the program and its risks. And I think that that's a great start even prior to submitting an RFP. All of our major defense contractors the Navy does business with also have small business representation within their offices. So getting to know those large business prime small business reps, because they are constantly looking for new small businesses to come in to the environment so that they can subcontract with them and leverage your skills as well. And then again, on business, what you want to do prime with us, really making sure that you're engaging with those requirements holders and those contracting officers to understand that requirement. I think if you really understand the requirement and understand the risks of the program, you're going to be able to put together a proposal that will stand out, because it'll really show that you do understand the program and you've done your homework up front before you've actually submitted a proposal.
Yeah, let me just foot stomp on this. That's a really good question, and there's and I've seen this too. There's a perception that we don't want to have discussions with industry. That is far from the truth. We want to hear from industry to help shape the requirement, and even after the solicitation is out, to amend the solicitation to ensure that we have the maximum competition or the capability that we need, because we don't know it all. We rely on industry. So if you folks are getting stiff-armed at some point, folks don't want to talk to you, please raise that up, because it is the position of the Department of the Navy that we want to have all our procurements fully vetted and discussed, again, to make sure we have the right capability and we have the appropriate competition if that's the case. So I would encourage you to push back if you're getting a stiff arm, either from the prime or definitely from the government, saying that your understanding is that discussions are encouraged and should be listened to, and voices should be heard throughout the procurement process. The bright line would obviously be after your proposal is in, or even at the point of us issuing a formal solicitation. I would go through the contracting officer. But before then, like Cindy said, discuss with the technical people, the program people, and so that you fully understand the requirement and we fully understand what you can bring to our effort.
Thank you both for that advice. Our next attendee states, "My company does not list our price book publicly due to fear of our competitors seeing it. What other methods can be used to justify the pricing we quote the Navy?"
So there's various methods that we use, for price justification. And again, if it's firm fixed price, it's firm fixed price. If it's cost, we use various realism techniques to make sure that we're getting fair and reasonable. And even if we can't compare, if we don't have history for you, we can compare amongst the market or like vendors. But again, the more information that you can provide or insight within the proposal is helpful as well.
Thank you for that. Our next question also touches on a topic that was brought up in your opening comments about hub zones, but we want to make sure that all of our attendees are fully familiar with these issues. Our attendee states, "All communities are vulnerable right now, but hub zones are extremely vulnerable in these times, with so many great hub zones in technology sectors. Can contracting please consider more hub zone set aside in technology?"
So I think hub zone is an area where we have been challenged in the past. And I think this is an area, a prime example, where we have more work to do. And I think, again, a big part of that is making sure that we really understand what all the capabilities are in particular hub zones. So we've got work to do on our end, but also request that you do get in touch with those small business representatives within the heads of our contracting activities, so that they know you're there, they know what you're capable of, they know your product and service lines, and they know you're out there. So as requirements come, if we have an opportunity to set aside for hub zone, we'll absolutely do it. So I think it's a making sure that we're connecting the requirements with the hub zone holders out there and to see what's in the art of the possible. So please, let's make those connections. I think this is an area where we could grow a lot.
I agree with that.
Thank you. Mr. Frankfurt, can you explain in more detail what you mean when you said the Navy will be playing a bigger effort on PPE procurement?
Yeah, I want to get too far ahead on this, but as I understand it, HHS has asked OSD through an interagency agreement to help in the procurement of masks, for example, maybe hand sanitizer, and so that we can bring our contracting power to bear, both at the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army, as well as OSD via DLA, for example, to help out on this effort. And I understand that the Air Force has already conducted one of these procurements for masks. So this is just getting started, and so we'll see where it takes us.
Thank you. We have another. Oh, excuse me. We have another question relating to one of Mr. Frankfurt's opening remarks on consolidation and bundling. Our attendee asks, was the fiscal year 2019 10% increase in money obligated and the 10% decrease in actions the result of consolidation and bundling?
So I would say the answer is no, not necessarily. I will tell you that, when we talk about actions, it's not just new procurement actions, it's all contracting actions, including incremental funding and admin actions. So we are trying to get more efficient across the board, also trying to make sure that we're doing, block buys or multi-year procurements. But I think to Mr. Frankfurt's point, we want to make sure that we hear that, when we're trying to be more efficient or effective, making sure that we understand that we're not having any adverse impacts. So we're still using multiple award IDIQs in some areas, but we're looking at ways that we can procure more efficiently and more effectively. So Lex actions can sometimes mean less contractors in the industrial base, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen.
So for example, using the IDIQ, if we have a delivery order that's executed by a large business and a delivery order that's executed by a small business, and then we decide to consolidate or bundle it, we take that very seriously at this level and looking to see if that bundling is something that the small clearly objects to, because the small won't be able to execute the consolidated work effort. And what I guess I'm saying is that we take this review very seriously, and if we're not doing it correctly, or if we're cutting folks out of prime contracts that they otherwise would want to have for purposes of growing their business, we'd like to hear your voice. And through industry days or contracting folks, so that we make sure we're getting this right. If the small business is happy being a subcontractor, that can work too. But what I'm asking is for the small businesses to raise their voice on these issues if they think that it's going in the wrong direction for growing small businesses.
Thank you, sir. Our next attendee asks, does the Navy have requirements where it can award sole source awards via SBA 8A programs? The attendee goes on to say, this is important for 8A firms who are not on Seaport Next Gen.
Yes, we have done sole source 8A procurements. Again, it kind of depends on the requirement. If we have multiple 8As that are capable of doing it, we may compete amongst 8As, but we do like doing small business 8A set-asides or sole source procurements as the circumstances warrant.
Thank you. Our next question asks, what are your thoughts on SBIR Phase 3 contracts for material versus services contracts?
So I will tell you, we do have I'd say the bulk of the phase threes are mostly in the area of hardware as well as software, which is where we see most of the phase threes across the Department of Navy. Um, Again, both may apply for phase three SIBRs, depending upon the circumstances. It might be a process or a methodology that is a service. But I think right now, the majority that I've seen at least have been in the areas of software as well as hardware.
I would agree with that, that we're looking more in the production area, software, hardware for SIBR 3 efforts than the services.
Thank you both. And I think we have time for one more question before we turn things back over to National Executive Director Mike Stevens. And here it is. Have you seen any efficiencies or changes in efficiency in the way that we do business during COVID-19? And if so, in what areas? Also, do you anticipate that these more efficient processes will continue when things go back to, quote, normal?
That's a really good question, and a question that I think we've been pondering ourselves within the RDA's office, and something that Secretary Gertz has specifically challenged us to look at. I think we are trying to figure out, what can we do without traveling, where we thought we had to travel in order to perform a certain piece of the mission. Perhaps we don't need to travel. Perhaps we can use alternate technology. Walking through spaces with cameras to do inspections might be an example where we could perhaps be more efficient and effective that we thought, and not lose downtime to either contractor or government personnel having to travel on site, and being able to diagnose an issue and address it in a more time efficient and effective manner. So I think those are some of the positives that we're actually seeing and analyzing, if it is actually necessary, and making us question in some areas of, could we do business more efficiently and effectively. I think the other example I talked about a little bit earlier is electronic receipt of proposals, and how we can do that more efficiently and effectively, and perhaps even, utilize video technology as far as holding industry days. Some of our HCAs have reported that they've been doing virtual industry days as opposed to face-to-face industry days, and attendance has been very, very good, which means that small businesses don't have to pay to send representatives to attend face-to-face, that they have no different advantage or disadvantage, that they are seeing the same video at the same time like everyone else, and that they're not losing out by not being there personally and physically in the room, and perhaps allowing us to include more industry in the discussion. So I think there are some advantages, and we're continuing to analyze to figure out, how do we make some lemonade out of lemons in the COVID situation, figure out what are the positives that we can pull out of the situation, and react appropriately, perhaps continue those practices in the future, and become more resilient.
Yeah, I concur with that. The Navy has what we call the gate review process, where we bring the requirements folks, the funding folks, the acquisition folks, the leaders within the Department of Navy to make decisions at different phases of our major procurements, development, procurement, sustainment, production, sustainment. And to get those meetings set up has been a Herculean effort, because there's so many senior individuals that attend those meetings. With the use of video teleconferencing, which is, to me, more obviously the only way we can get things done now, and conference calls, keeps those meetings on time and not delayed. And that's making us more efficient in our decision making, and moving these, not only these large procurements along, but the smaller procurements too. So I'm hoping, and if we get back to normal, whatever that is, that we continue to take advantage of these tools, and the expectation doesn't have to be that you need to be there in person, but you a conference call or video teleconferencing works just as well.
Thank you so much for providing that insight. I believe National Executive Director Mike Stevens would like to make a few closing comments. Sir, just so you know, you are on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, I knew that, Luke. I think we're all assessing how we did business or how we're doing business now as compared to how we did it previously. I know at the Navy League, we're having that discussion right now. Absent the COVID situation, we would have probably taken years, if ever, to do things that we're doing now. And we're finding that there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained. Now it's a matter of getting through our own personal paradigms if we're willing to, adopt that when we go back to, as Mr. Frankfurt said, normal. So we'll see. But Secretary and Mr. Frankfurt, the Navy League certainly is privileged to host today's webinar on procurement. And we thank both of you for spending time with our small business professionals today. It's very much appreciated. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Our pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Shaver and Mr. Frankfurt, for answering our questions this afternoon. And thank you again to our sponsor, IBM, for their support. Tomorrow's webinar will include the directors from all 10 buying commands representing the Office of Small Business Programs at the Department of the Navy. Come back at 3 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow for this informative session. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you tomorrow.